Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show where we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you. It's Ratadrabik of Urborg. And let me tell you, there is nothing drab about this commander. So very quickly, let's go over what Ratadrabik does. So he has Vigilance and Ward 2. That's a nice little bit of protection. He's also going to give zombies you control Vigilance. That's cool. But the main thing is whenever a legendary creature you control dies, you're going to get a token copy of it that isn't legendary. That's it. No exile clause, no once per turn, no nothing to keep this from being abused. This is a really sweet card. So the way we're going to build this deck obviously is around that ability. We have a bunch of legendaries that are going to synergize really well with Ratadrabik. The best cards in the deck are those where you're not even losing stats when you get a copy, you're just straight up getting a copy. So without further ado, let's move on to the list. And we're starting with the Dawn Sky. Legendaries with death triggers are particularly good in this kind of strategy because you're going to be able to use it again when the creature dies a second time. This particular one is great. It's going to let us dump more stuff onto the board or make all of our board big. Athrio's Shroud Veiled is really good because we're going to be putting counters on creatures we control, and then when they die, they're going to come straight back to the battlefield. This synergizes really well with our commander and lets us freely sacrifice our creatures since we know we're getting them back. Ayara, First of Lothlórien, is a nice sack outlet, and it's also going to work really well with the tokens that Ratadrabik is creating, and we're going to drain our opponents each time we get a token. Eily, Eternal Pilgrim, is awesome. We're getting a card that isn't losing many stats at all because it's a 2/3 originally, so that's really great. And the ability is a sack outlet, so that's another plus for this card. We also have a third ability that's another sack outlet that's going to let us destroy permanents. This is just so much synergy in one card. This works so well in this shell. Benny Brack's Zoologist is an awesome card, and in this deck, even though it seems a bit counterintuitive, we can be making tokens at instant speed with our commander, so we should be able to draw at least 1 or 2 extra cards per turn cycle with this, which makes it pretty amazing. And since it's a legendary, even if they remove it, we're probably going to get a token copy. Braid's Arisen Nightmare is there as another way to sack our creatures. We don't really care so much what they do, whether they sack one of their things or let us draw cards. It's just going to let us sack a creature and get a token copy of it. Elysil Core Sadistic Pilgrim fits perfectly in the deck. It's a legendary that doesn't lose stats when it comes back, so that's awesome. And then it's going to be gaining us life when a creature enters the battlefield, and it's going to be pinging our opponents when one of our creatures dies, so both of those are fantastic. Elenda the Dusk Rose is amazing. Not only is it going to be growing anytime a creature dies, which is very easy to achieve in this deck, it also gives us lifelink, which we want to stay alive. And when it dies, we're going to get a bunch of Vampires tokens. But it's a legendary, so basically when it dies, we're going to get another copy of it that's going to come back as a 2/2, even bigger than it was originally, and then it's going to start the cycle all over again. But we also have all these life-linking tokens after that, so this just fits every possible angle. Erebos Bleak-Hearted is a nice little bit of card draw. We are going to be sacrificing quite a bit, and our creature's going to be dying a bit, and we should have a bunch of life to pay for the ability. God Eternal Bontu is a great way to sacrifice legendaries to get copies of them with Ratadrabik, and it's also just going to draw us cards on top of that, so this is fantastic in the deck. Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia, is going to make more sacrifice fodder. It's going to make a decayed zombie each turn, and if it dies and comes back, it comes back as a 2/2, which is even better. Junji the Midnight Sky fits the deck perfectly. It's a legendary, so it works with Ratadrabik, and then when it dies, we can bring back another creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. And let me tell you, we're running a lot of big fatties in this deck, so that's going to be really good. We can also make people discard if we really want to. Kambal, Consul of Allocation, is really good because it's going to come back and barely lose any stats, so it's going to make it very hard for our opponents to play non-creature spells eventually, because we're going to have multiples of these out very likely. Against certain decks, that can just be really annoying. Kothoped Soul Hoarder is a really good card that I feel should see more play in Commander. It's going to let us draw a card anytime any of our opponent's things are put into a graveyard. That happens quite a lot in a game of Commander, and if they kill it, we just get another copy of it with a Ratadrabik, so great card in this deck. Liesa is an absolute beating in this deck. It's a flying lifelink, which is already awesome, and then it's also graveyard hate for our opponents, but it's also going to return those creatures that we sacrifice or die to our hand at the end of turn for more shenanigans. This feels really good in the deck. Mikaeus the Unhallowed is amazing in this deck. We're not running that many humans, so most of our creatures are just going to come back when we sacrifice them and get a token that's a copy of them, so it's just going to work so well. It's also incredibly difficult to remove in this deck. In Thara, Merciless Soul is absolutely amazing as a finisher in this deck. It has Ward X, where X is the number of experience counters you have. And you're probably thinking, but it's not usually great to have an experience counter creature as part of your 99. But in this deck, it really is. So at the beginning of our end step, if a permanent left the battlefield this turn, we're going to get an experience counter. We're definitely having permanents leave the battlefield. And then all of our creatures are going to get +1/+0 for each experience counter we have. She needs to be in play for that to happen, but there's so many ways to reanimate this, and there's so many ways to get token copies with Ratadrabik that shouldn't be very difficult. This is going to give our team a massive boost, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to remove since it has the ward as well. She's awesome in this deck. Moira, Urborg, Horned, we're just trying her out for the time being, but seeing as we're sacrificing a bunch of our stuff, this should be quite good if it connects. We can even get a token copy of it, and we're not losing many stats when we do so. Rankle, Master of Pranks, is another nice one that's going to connect immediately, and even if we make a token copy, it still has haste. And then it also lets us sacrifice one of our things, and all of our opponents are going to be sacrificing too, so it synergizes very well with the deck there. Ravos Soul Tender is another one that you don't often see in the 99, but it's really good in this deck when we're making copies of it. It's going to give all of our creatures +1/+1 and return a creature from the graveyard to our hand at the beginning of the end step. So the obvious thing to do with this is sack it when Ratadrabik is out, we get a token copy. At the end step, we'll return the original, which we can then play again next turn. That's really, really sweet. Rhea Dawnbringer is the most expensive card in the deck, so we're often going to be trying to reanimate her if possible. We can just hard cast her too. If we sacrifice her with Ratadrabik out, then during the upkeep we can bring her back, and then we're bringing 2 creatures back from our graveyard every turn straight to the battlefield. That should end the game in short order. Shadowheart Dark Justiciar is just a nice little sack outlet, and it's going to draw some cards. Shieldred Whispering One is similar to Rhea Dawnbringer, so again we want to be getting copies of her. If we have multiples in play, then the opponent's going to be sacrificing a bunch of stuff, and it's just a very strong card in this deck. Sidisi Undead Vizier is another sack outlet that's also going to search up the perfect card for every situation when it comes into play. So Conrad the Grim can get really ridiculous in multiples in this deck. It makes it so our opponents have to block, but they also can't block, because if our stuff dies, they're just taking a bunch of damage. Teshar Ancestor's Apostle is awesome. We have a lot of cheap creatures in this deck that we're going to be bringing back with all of our artifacts and all of our legendaries. Teysa Karlov is obviously an auto-include. It's going to double all of our Ratadrabik triggers, getting us even more tokens. We also have a bunch of creatures that naturally have death triggers, so that's awesome. But we can also get multiples of her with Ratadrabik, at which point it just kind of explodes. You're making all of these death triggers trigger 5 or 6 times, and it's getting absolutely out of control. Teysa Orzhov Scion is a nice way to use all of the tokens we're going to be making, and it's also just a nice little sack outlet. Viconian Drow Apostate is going to keep our hand full by returning a creature card at random to our hand every upkeep. Viscera Seer is a classic sack outlet to scry through our deck. Vishkal Blood Arbiter is a sack outlet that is also going to let us kill our opponent's things. This is very, very good in this deck because it's a free sack outlet that can also get copied with Ratadrabik. Vona is a nice little bit of removal for permanents. It's also a really good one to copy with Ratadrabik because we don't really care about its stats. Whisper Blood Liturgist is really good. Once you get the shenanigans going, you can start sacking 2 creatures to bring something back from the graveyard, and it can just get out of control very quickly. Yeheni is awesome in this deck. It's a sacrifice outlet that can make itself indestructible, and every time an opponent's creature dies, it's going to get bigger. We're all for both of those things. Finally, in the creature department, we have Yoshimaru. He's a really good boy, and he's going to grow really big in this deck with all the legendaries flying about. Next up, we have our artifacts. So starting off as usual, here are our mana rocks. You should run them. Mana rocks are great. La 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 la, typical stuff. Then we have Altar of Baal. It's a really awesome one because it's going to let us constantly reanimate stuff. We don't care about exiling our little token copies to get a real creature back, but we can also exile all these other tokens that are made by other creatures, so this is just great in the deck. Ashnod's Altar is a nice little mana rock. You could also run Phyrexian Altar if you have it. They're both pretty good. Blade of Selves is an incredibly spicy one in this deck. So the way it works is you're going to make a token copy of equipped creature for each opponent you have when you attack. Now usually you don't want to put this on legendaries, right? Because they're going to die to the legendary rule. But with Ratadrabik in play, the 3 token copies are gonna die, and then you're going to immediately get 3 token copies of the creature permanently into play, because Ratadrabik does not care about the fact that they are tokens. It only cares that a legendary creature died. Those are legendary, So this is just unbelievably good in the deck. It's already a decent card, but in this deck, it is absolute nonsense. Expedition Map is there to search for Urborg or coffers. It's always nice to have. Idol of Oblivion is going to be nice. We're going to be able to draw quite a few cards off it because we're making a lot of tokens. Skull Clamp is a nice one to draw some more cards. We do have a lot of creatures dying, so it's good to have. And then we're moving on to our enchantments. We have Anointed Procession. It's an expensive card, but it is really, really good in this deck. It's going to be doubling all of our tokens. That's really, really good. Dictate of Erebos is another kind of expensive one, but it works pretty well in the deck. It's not essential, so you can substitute it for something else or another legendary if you want to. Butcher of Malakir can do the job pretty much as well. Song of the Word Soul is an awesome card because it's going to let us populate every time we play anything. So once we have a few tokens out with Ratadrabik, this is going to get out of control really, really quickly. And then we're moving on to our sorceries. We have Damn to clear the board. Still one of the best removal spells, in my opinion, at the moment in Commander. Dread Return is really nice in this deck. It's going to let us reanimate a creature once, and then we can sacrifice 3 creatures to reanimate again. We're pretty cool with sacrificing creatures. We have a lot of death triggers, and it's just going to work very well in the deck. Incarnation Technique is an awesome card that I really like. In this deck, we have so many big fatties that we're very likely to hit 2 really big things when we cast this early on. Primeval's Glorious Rebirth is obviously going to be amazing. It's going to bring back pretty much all the creatures in our graveyard to the battlefield. That's fantastic. Rite of Oblivion is an underrated removal spell in any kind of sacrifice deck. It's going to be able to deal with 2 permanents for us, and it's not even particularly expensive. The flashback is 4 mana, which is completely reasonable. And Burial Rites is just 2 reanimation spells in 1, very efficient. And Victimize is just a nice one to get 2 creatures back from the graveyard. And then for instance, we have Brought Back, which is a nice one. It's going to let us have a little bit of protection against board wipes, but it can also work in our own deck. We can have some pretty nasty turns where we sacrifice 2 things and then play Brought Back, and they both come to the battlefield with the copies. So we can just double up on our legendary. It's really awesome. Rootborn Defenses is a nice little bit of board protection that comes with the Populate attached. We love both of those things. And Vanishing Verse is a nice little bit of catch-all removal. And then finally for Planeswalkers, we have Kaya Geist Hunter. And we're running it mostly for the -2 ability, which is going to let us double the amount of tokens we create this turn. You can have some absolutely ridiculous turns with this, where you just minus it and then sacrifice all your board of legendaries, and suddenly you get like a ton of creatures on the board. It's awesome. And finally, we're moving on to lands. Cabal Coffers and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth work really well together to provide a ton of mana. High Market is a nice little free sack outlet. Shuzo Death's Storehouse is going to give one of our creatures fear, but it only works on legendaries. But in this deck, that's not going to be a big problem since the whole deck is legendary. Takenuma, the Abandoned Mire, is a nice little way to fill up our graveyard for our reanimation spells and get a nice creature back. And Vault of the Archangel is going to give all of our creatures Death Touch and Lifelink, which as usual is pretty good. Finally, we have Malakir Rebirth, which is in most of our recent decks. It's a nice way to protect your combo when they're trying to target Ratadrabik and remove him from play. Well, there you have it. That has been our Ratadrabik of Urborg deck tech. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments section below if you would build it any differently. I read all of your comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel, and we're currently growing. And until next time, take care.